A few years ago, I became a flight attendant. It was my very first real job, my first foray into a professional world that didn't involve coffee runs or folding jeans in the back of a retail store. I just completed my training with a small regional airline based out of Sacramento, California, and I was equal parts nervous and thrilled. Our airline mostly handled short domestic routes, Sacramento to Portland, Eugene, Boise, Reno, and sometimes San Diego. Nothing glamorous, but I didn't care. I was seeing the country, meeting new people, and living a life that seemed, at least for a while, wide open with promise. I rented a one-bedroom apartment in Midtown Sacramento, just a few blocks from where the trees bloom pink in the spring and the bars buzz on Friday nights. My unit was tiny, barely large enough for a love seat, a kitchenette, and a mattress on the floor, but it was mine. I lived alone, and for the first time in my life, that wasn't scary. At first, the job was everything I hoped for. Early mornings, yes, but also early evenings. I'd return home exhausted but content. I'd pour a glass of wine, slip off my shoes, and let reruns of The Office fill the room while I dozed on the couch. I liked the steady rhythm. Wake, work, unwind, repeat. Then I started noticing him. The first time I saw him was on a morning flight to Eugene. He was seated in 12C, an aisle seat, and wore a charcoal gray overcoat, oddly heavy for the warm weather, and a pair of polished black shoes that looked like they'd never touched dirt. His hair was dark, combed neatly, and his face was ordinary. Not unattractive, not especially memorable, but something about the way he held himself stood out. Upright posture, quiet hands folded in his lap, eyes alert. When I passed by, he looked up and smiled. It was polite, nothing more. That should have been the end of it. But then he showed up again. And again. Within 2 weeks, I'd seen the same man on 4 different flights, all mine, all booked within a tight schedule. He never spoke beyond a soft thank you, never asked for refills, never caused trouble. Just sat, still and silent, watching. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. Frequent flyers were common. Business travelers often hopped between the same cities. But each time I saw him, I felt colder. His gaze felt too deliberate, too focused. I'd walk the aisle and feel him watching me, not just glancing but observing like he was studying something. Memorizing. That's when I started avoiding eye contact. I'd keep my attention on passengers with real needs, families, nervous flyers, elderly guests. But in my periphery, I could feel him. On every flight, he sat quietly and watched. Not once did I see him use a phone, read a book, or rest his eyes. Then, on a flight to Spokane, I caught him doing something that made my stomach turn. I was halfway down the aisle when I glanced toward his seat, and there he was, holding his phone up, the lens aimed directly at me. He didn't flinch when I noticed. He didn't pretend to redirect the camera. He just slowly lowered the phone, locked eyes with me, and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. Not anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with my phone clutched in my hand, tempted to call someone, anyone, but I didn't want to seem dramatic. He hadn't touched me. He hadn't spoken to me beyond basic politeness. What would I even say? Hey, there's a guy who keeps showing up on my flights, and I think he's watching me. It sounded paranoid. So I said nothing. But things escalated. We had a layover in Portland, and I was genuinely looking forward to it. Our hotel was near the Pearl District, clean, modern, and walking distance from a cafe I loved. After checking in, I changed into jeans and a hoodie, left my crew behind, and stepped out for a quiet dinner. As I rounded the corner outside the hotel, I stopped cold. Across the street, under a flickering street lamp, stood Jonathan. That was the first time I knew his name. He'd used it when checking in on a previous flight. I remembered because he said it softly to the gate agent, and something about the way he said it, calm, slow, as though savoring it, had stuck with me. Now, under the buzz of failing neon, he stood motionless. Watching. I ducked back around the corner, heart hammering in my chest. He had been on my flight earlier that day, and now he was here, in the same city, on the same street. I turned and walked the other way fast. I didn't stop until I reached the cafe. Inside, I picked a table in the back, far from the windows. I ordered a sandwich but barely touched it. My eyes kept darting to the door. And then he came in. He didn't speak or even acknowledge me beyond a subtle nod. He ordered a coffee, sat at the counter, and occasionally glanced in my direction. Calm, composed, as if this was a normal evening for him. I left. I practically ran back to the hotel, checking over my shoulder with every step. I locked my door, dragged a chair against it, and sat awake until sunrise. The next morning, I almost told my manager. Almost. But I didn't. I had no proof. He hadn't followed me inside. Maybe it was all coincidence. Maybe I was losing it. So I stayed silent. Weeks passed. I didn't see him. I told myself it was over. He'd moved on, or I'd imagined the worst. I started sleeping again. I started feeling like myself. And then, on a late evening flight from Los Angeles to Sacramento, he boarded again. This time, he was in 1A, right beside the galley. I couldn't avoid him. Every time I reached for a drink, every time I opened a cabinet, he was there. Watching. His eyes never left me. Not once. When we landed, I waited in the rear of the plane while passengers exited. I hoped he would just leave like everyone else. He didn't. He lingered. Took his time. Adjusted his coat. Then, as he passed me, he leaned just close enough to whisper, "Have a good night. I'll see you soon." His voice was smooth, controlled. But the words felt more like a threat than a farewell. I stood frozen, heart pounding in my ears. The next morning, I finally reported him. I told my supervisor everything. To their credit, they took me seriously, contacted airline security, filed a report, even alerted the police. But without a clear threat or physical evidence, there was little they could do. They adjusted my flight schedule, gave me time off, moved me to different routes. For a while it helped. Then came the note. I got home from grocery shopping late one night, arms full of bags, keys between my fingers. As I approached my apartment door, I saw something out of place. A small piece of paper folded neatly and slipped under the mat. I picked it up with shaking hands. Inside, printed in clean, blocky letters, were 5 words. "You shouldn't have told anyone." My blood ran cold. I called the police. Officers came, reviewed the building's cameras, asked neighbors. Nothing. No one had seen anyone unusual. There were no clear images of anyone slipping the note under my door. No fingerprints. No evidence. Again, I moved. Changed my number. Requested permanent reassignment to a different base. I deleted all my social media. I even started carrying pepper spray. Paranoia became survival. I watched people more closely. I kept every curtain drawn, even during the day. Jonathan never showed up again. But I still think of him. When I walk alone at night. When I see a passenger with slick back hair and a gray coat. When I feel eyes on me in a crowded terminal. Sometimes, standing in the galley, I feel that same cold stare on my back. Last winter, my uncle and aunt came to visit me in Atlanta. It had been years since we'd seen each other. We spent most of the evening trading stories, sipping cocoa, and laughing over old family photos. But sometime after midnight, the conversation drifted into stranger territory. We began sharing odd, inexplicable things we'd encountered, those little moments where logic seems to flicker like a dying bulb. That's when my uncle grew quiet. Now, you need to understand something. My uncle is a no-nonsense kind of man. He doesn't believe in ghosts, hates horror movies, and once called supernatural stories just dust in the attic of bored minds. So when he said, "There's one thing I've never told anyone outside the family," I sat up. He looked at me, smiled faintly, and added, "Some parts might sound impossible, but you're free to believe what you want." I opened my laptop and started typing as he told me everything. He began with how he finished school at Fordham University in 1974. Back then, landing a job wasn't too difficult. Companies came straight to college campuses, offering interviews and start dates before diplomas were even printed. My uncle, though, didn't want a desk job. He didn't want to be trapped in a cubicle or spend his life sorting memos. He found his answer while flying home for Thanksgiving. Looking out the plane window at night, he saw the blinking lights of other aircraft and heard the calm, deliberate voices of air traffic control over the speaker. That's when it hit him. He wanted to be in the tower, guiding pilots through the sky. By his 27th birthday, he'd passed every exam and was cleared to work without a supervisor. He expected a big city assignment, maybe Chicago O'Hare or Denver International. Instead, they sent him to Atlantic, Iowa. If you've never heard of it, that's okay. Most haven't. It's a small farming town surrounded by miles of cornfields and stitched-together gravel roads. The airport had one short runway and a tower with no more than 2 floors. A skeleton crew manned it during the day, but at night, only one controller stayed on duty, with a guard posted below near the empty ticket counters. The shifts ran until 4 a.m., mostly uneventful. His first few months were filled with long, silent nights. He read thick paperbacks, scribbled in crossword books, and whispered to my aunt on the phone. The radio occasionally crackled to life with a request from a tiny Cessna or a freight jet needing to drop low due to turbulence or fuel. He called it the loneliest job in the world, but strangely peaceful. Until February 20th, 1979. That night, the wind howled across the flat fields, rattling the windows of the glass tower. There was no snow, but the cold was sharp, bitter, and dry. He was scheduled for a solo shift. Nothing was on the flight board. He expected another night of boredom. At 1:07 a.m., the tower radio crackled. A small Cessna requested emergency assistance. A storm over Omaha had forced the pilot to divert. My uncle grabbed his binoculars, checked visibility, and gave the green light. It would be a rough landing. The crosswinds were bad, but the strip was clear. The plane touched down with a bounce, but landed safely. Then, through the binoculars, he saw her. A woman. She was walking slowly, barefoot, directly up the center of the runway. Her dress was thin, summery floral, completely out of place for the freezing air. No shoes, no coat, just long, dark hair whipping around her face. He blinked, rubbed his eyes. She was still there. "Control to Cessna, 5K, he said. "Do you see a woman on the runway?" The pilot responded calmly, surprised. "Yeah, hold on." The man stepped out of the plane, walked toward her. My uncle watched through the lenses as they met. The woman leaned in close, too close, and whispered something into the pilot's ear. Then, without warning, the pilot turned and sprinted back to the plane. He fired up the engine and took off, ignoring every radio call. My uncle sat frozen, stunned. The only clear words that came through the radio before the engine cut out were, "Run." Then static. He lowered the binoculars. The woman was now facing the tower. Even from 200 yards away, he could see her eyes, wide, too wide, stretched so far it looked painful. She didn't blink. She didn't move. Then she started running. Straight toward him. He called for the night guard on the downstairs line. No answer. He stood and looked down just in time to see the front door to the tower slam open. The sound echoed like a gunshot. He bolted for the small equipment room and locked himself inside the narrow bathroom at the back. He crouched in the dark, heart racing, listening. Outside, chaos erupted. Drawers slammed. Equipment crashed to the floor. Footsteps thudded. Too fast, too heavy for someone barefoot. A moment of quiet came, then a single, deafening bang against the bathroom door so hard it shook the handle. Then silence. He stayed in there until just after sunrise. When the next controller, Clark, arrived at 7:45 a.m., he found my uncle pale, shaking, crouched in the corner of the room like a shell-shocked soldier. The control tower was wrecked. Radio panels were torn from their mounts. Screens were cracked. Paper lay strewn across the floor like confetti. Police came. They took statements. Joe, the guard, was fired for sleeping on duty. Repairs took nearly 2 weeks. Everyone chalked it up to a break-in. Maybe a drifter. Maybe drugs. Maybe a mental break. But my uncle knew better. He returned to work on March 4th. For a while, things were quiet. Snow fell gently across the empty runways. Then, one night near the end of his shift, a private jet requested an emergency landing. Ice buildup, engine trouble. They needed to come down immediately. He gave clearance and watched the runway. Then there she was. The woman appeared again. Same dress. Same bare feet. This time, she stood at the far end of the runway, staring directly at the tower. Her eyes, those same wide, unblinking eyes, never wavered. He tried to delay the landing, but the pilot insisted they couldn't hold. He locked the downstairs door, ran back to the tower window, and scanned the tarmac. She was gone. But the moment the plane began final approach, he heard it. A bang on the door, then footsteps. Heavy, measured, climbing the staircase slowly. He tried to speak calmly into the radio, guiding the jet, while behind him, the office door creaked open. And then he felt it, cold breath against his neck. A whisper. "Come down to the field." The tone wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The freight plane landed safely. The breath faded. The footsteps retreated. They searched the tower, searched the field, found barefoot prints in the snow, leading from the field to the tower. None returned. And then a month later, it happened for the last time. I hadn't flown in years. Not since my husband passed. But when my grandson insisted I attend his college graduation in Miami, I couldn't say no. He even booked the ticket himself, bless his heart, on the cheapest red-eye he could find. United Flight 1658, San Francisco to Miami, departing at 11:55 p.m. and landing just after 8 a.m. I was nervous. I'm 69, I walk with a cane, and I don't move as fast as I used to. But the gate agent at SFO was kind. She pre-boarded me with a smile and helped me down the jet bridge. The cabin was dim, quiet, and smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee. My seat was 14B, an aisle. The window seat beside me, 14A, showed as vacant on the screen at the gate. That felt like a small mercy. A little extra room. Some quiet. A blessing on a night flight like this. I placed my purse on the floor, stretched the seatbelt across my lap, and folded my coat over my knees. The plane filled slowly. Passengers drifted past in a kind of exhausted silence, earbuds in, hoodies up, hands curled around paper coffee cups. Most didn't speak. They just shuffled to their seats and slumped into place like they were already dreaming. It wasn't until the last few passengers were boarding that I noticed him. A tall man in a gray wool coat stepped into my row, without a glance at his ticket, without hesitation, and slipped quietly into 14A. He moved fluidly, as if he'd done it 1,000 times. I felt the cold brush of his coat sleeve as he passed, and I instinctively leaned away. He sat down without saying a word. No carry-on. No phone. No drink. He kept his gloved hands folded in his lap, his chin tucked into a dark scarf. I couldn't see much of his face, only the curve of a pale jaw and the edge of one cheekbone. At first, I thought nothing of it. Flights are full of strangers. But something about this man made my skin prickle. His posture was too straight, unnaturally stiff, like he was bracing for something. He didn't look around. Didn't fidget. Just sat, still as stone, facing forward. I leaned slightly toward him and whispered, "Long night?" No response. I tried again. Miami's warmer than this, at least. Still nothing. Not even a glance. I chuckled softly and turned away. Maybe he was wearing headphones under that scarf. Maybe he didn't want to talk. That was fine. The lights dimmed for takeoff. I expected him to adjust his seatbelt, but when I glanced down, it was already fastened. I hadn't seen him buckle it. In fact, I hadn't seen him move at all. As the plane lifted, the cabin rattled gently. A bit of turbulence. I gripped the armrest, but the man beside me didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He didn't shift. His coat looked odd in the dim light, like the fabric was damp, the way wool gets after walking through drizzle. But there had been no rain that day. About an hour into the flight, the attendants rolled out the beverage cart. One of them, a young woman with a kind smile, leaned toward me. "Anything to drink?" "Ginger ale, please." She handed me a can and a small cup, then glanced at the man beside me. "And for him?" I shrugged. "He hasn't said a word." She bent a little closer. "Sir?" No response. She hesitated, then placed a sealed water bottle on his tray table and moved on. The cart rolled away down the aisle. I sipped my ginger ale, the fizz sharp in my throat. I glanced at the man. He hadn't touched the water, hadn't unfolded his tray. His gloved hands remained exactly as they'd been, folded neatly in his lap. And I noticed something else. His gloves didn't reflect light, not like leather usually does. They seemed to absorb it, like the blackness of them was deeper than the shadows around us. I must have dozed off. When I opened my eyes, the cabin was dark except for the faint glow of emergency aisle lights and the ghostly flicker of a movie 3 rows ahead. I shifted in my seat, my neck stiff. That's when I realized something was wrong. The man's coat sleeve was pressed gently against my arm. Not from turbulence. Not from a sudden shift. It was too steady. Too intentional. I drew back slightly and whispered, "Excuse me, could you give me a little space?" Nothing. I tried again, louder this time. "Sir?" Still nothing. I pressed the call button overhead. It didn't light up. No chime. Maybe the bulb had burned out. Rather than wait, I decided to stand. I needed to move anyway. My legs ached, and the restroom was only a few rows away. I rose carefully, stepping into the aisle with my cane. I looked back once as I walked. He hadn't moved. Still seated. Still staring straight ahead. When I reached the rear of the cabin, I joined a short line by the lavatory. 2 teenagers and a man in a wrinkled suit waited ahead of me. I glanced down the aisle toward my seat. From that angle, 14A looked empty. Just the headrest. I blinked. Leaned right. Squinted. Still empty. A cold ripple passed through me. I turned quickly, heart pounding. Had he followed me? Had I not heard his footsteps? I waited for the restroom, used it quickly, then returned to my seat. He was there again. Exactly as before. I sat down slowly, hands trembling. I glanced at the water bottle on his tray. Still unopened. I couldn't hear him breathing. Not even a whisper of air. And somehow, I could still feel the faint pressure of his coat against my arm. I didn't sleep again. When the sun began to rise, a soft pink glow filtered through the windows. The lead attendant's voice came over the speaker, cheerful and calm. "Good morning, folks. We've begun our descent into Miami. Please return your seatbacks to the upright position." I focused on my bag, my seatbelt, my coat. I kept my eyes down until we landed. When the plane reached the gate, passengers stood, stretched, retrieved bags. The man beside me remained seated. I turned toward him, intending to say goodbye. Or maybe, I don't know, something. I reached out and touched his arm. The wool of his coat was colder than the window glass. I pulled my hand back, startled. I shuffled out of the row and down the aisle. As I stepped into the jet bridge, a young attendant followed me, clipboard in hand. "Ma'am, did you sit in 14B? "Yes," I said, adjusting my coat. "Was there someone in 14A? I hesitated. A man. Tall, gray coat, gloves. Didn't speak. The attendant frowned. "There's no passenger listed in that seat." It showed vacant on the manifest. A second crew member joined her, tablet in hand. We double-checked the boarding count. Every assigned seat was filled. No extras. No one sat in 14A. I felt dizzy. Back at my son's house, I told the story. He half laughed, half worried. "Are you sure, Mom?" I nodded. "I even took a photo when I boarded. To send to your sister." I opened the gallery. There it was, row 14, captured in that dim cabin light. 14A was empty. No gray coat. No gloved